In the days when Gilgalad yet held sway in Lindon, and before the last alliance was but a whisper in the minds of the wise, there came to the Grey Havens a woman of singular mystery. None could say from whence she came, for she bore no banner of any realm of men, nor did she carry the tokens of any house known to the elder day. Yet when she spoke, it was in the pure tongue of the firstborn, with such grace and ancient melody that even Círdan the shipwright paused in his eternal labors to listen. She was tall as were the women of Númenor in their glory, with hair like starlight upon dark waters, and eyes that held depths of memory no mortal should possess. Upon her breast she wore a pendant wrought of mithril, and set with a stone that caught the light of Gil Estel even in the fullness of day. When the Eldar questioned her of her lineage, she would speak only her name, Eledwin, meaning elf maiden, though it was clear to all that mortal blood flowed in her veins. "I seek passage to the undying lands," spoke she to Círdan in the tongue of Valinor, her words carrying a weight of ancient sorrow. "For I have walked too long in Middle-earth, and my spirit grows weary of this shadow-haunted realm." But Círdan, wise in the ways of both elves and men, perceived that more lay hidden beneath her request than mere weariness. "Patience, daughter of twilight," said he, his voice like the whisper of waves upon distant shores. "The ships that sail from these havens bear only those whose time in Middle-earth is ended, yet yours, methinks, has scarce begun." At these words, Eledwin's composure faltered, and for a moment the mask of ancient wisdom slipped from her features, revealing beneath it a spirit young and troubled. "You know not of what you speak, Lord Círdan," she replied, her voice now trembling like wind through autumn leaves. "I have seen the darkness that stirs in the east, and I know my part in the wars that are to come. Would that I could flee ere that hour arrives." "Then you are no mere wanderer," observed Círdan, "but one upon whom the threads of fate have been woven. Tell me true, Eledwin, of the hidden name. What brought you to speak as the Eldar speak? What gave you knowledge of tongues that died with the breaking of Beleriand?" But to this question she gave no answer, save to turn her gaze westward toward the sea, where the light of the setting sun painted the waves in hues of gold and crimson. In her eyes, Círdan glimpsed the reflection of flames that had burned in the elder days, and he wondered at the mystery that stood before him in mortal guise. Word of the strange woman who spoke perfect Sindarin reached the ears of Elrond half-elven in Rivendell, and he pondered much upon the tidings that came from the Grey Haven. In those days, the shadow of Dol Guldur had begun to lengthen across Rhovanion, and the wise were troubled by signs and portents that spoke of an ancient evil stirring once more. When next the White Council gathered in the halls of Rivendell, Elrond spoke of Eledwin to Gandalf the Grey and to Saruman the White, chief among the Astari. "Strange indeed are these tidings," mused Gandalf, his piercing gaze thoughtful beneath his bushy brows. "For in all my wanderings across Middle-earth, I have encountered none among the race of men who possessed such knowledge of the Elder Tongue without tutelage from the firstborn themselves. Perchance this woman holds secrets that might serve us in the darkness that approaches." Saruman, resplendent in his robes of white, listened with interest that seemed perhaps too keen. If she claims knowledge of the elder days, then surely she should be brought before this council to speak of what she has seen. The archives of Orthanc contain many mysteries, but none speak of mortals who possessed such gifts naturally. Thus it was decided that Eledwin should be summoned to Rivendell, and Gandalf himself departed from the hidden valley to seek her out. Yet when he arrived at the Grey Haven, he found that the mysterious woman had vanished as suddenly as she had appeared. Círdan could tell only that she had departed in the night, leaving behind no trace save a single note, written in the flowing script of the Eldar. "I go where duty calls," the message read, "though my heart yearns for the peace that lies beyond the circles of the world. Seek me not in the havens of the sea, but in the places where shadow gathers and hope grows dim. There shall you find me when the hour of greatest need arrives." Gandalf studied the note with growing unease, for the writing, though fair to behold, carried within its lines a power that spoke of more than mortal craft. The very parchment seemed to shimmer with an inner light, and the words themselves appeared to shift and change when viewed from different angles, revealing deeper meaning that troubled the wizard's heart. "There is more to this Eledwin than meets the eye," he murmured to Círdan. "I sense about her the touch of the Valar themselves, yet mingled with something else, something that speaks of sacrifice and sorrow beyond the common lot of mortals." When Gandalf returned to Rivendell without the mysterious woman, the White Council was much troubled. Yet even as they debated what course to take, word came from Thranduil's halls that a strange maiden had been seen walking the borders of Mirkwood, speaking to the trees in the ancient tongue, and walking unafraid through regions where the very air was thick with malice and decay. "She heals as she walks," reported one of the woodland realm's messengers, an elf whose eyes held wonder mixed with fear. "Where her feet have trodden, the sickly trees grow green again, and the spiders flee before her, as though burned by flame they cannot see. Yet she herself seems to grow paler with each passing day, as though the very life flows out of her and into the forest itself." This news stirred great debate among the wise, for such power was not given to mortal kind, nor even to many among the Eldar. Elrond himself grew thoughtful, for in the depths of his memory stirred recollections of ancient lore that he had thought long forgotten. "In the elder days," he spoke slowly, as though drawing words from a deep well, "there were those among both elves and men who bore within their blood the light of Valinor itself, not as inheritance, but as burden and blessing both. They were called the Lambin Golmor, the Tongue Master, and they served as bridges between the sundered kindred of the children of Ilúvatar. Yet all such were lost in the ruin of Beleriand," protested Saruman. "The art of their making died with Gil-galad upon the slopes of Mount Doom." "Did it?" asked Elrond quietly. "Or does it linger still in forms we have not recognized? Consider, this woman speaks not merely Sindarin, but Quenya also, and with such purity that even Círdan was moved to wonder. She heals the very wounds that Sauron's malice has wrought upon the world, yet at cost to herself. These are not the gifts of common magic, but something far older and more perilous." Meanwhile, in the depths of Mirkwood, Eletwen continued her strange work. Each day she walked deeper into the realm of shadow, and each night she rested in clearings that bloomed with flowers that had not been seen since the days before the shadow fell. The woodland elves watched her from afar, afraid to approach, yet unwilling to let her pass beyond their sight. On the 7th day of her walking, she came at last to the borders of Dol Guldur itself, where the very stones were black with malice, and the air itself seemed to writhe with unclean life. There she paused, and for the first time since entering Mirkwood, she wept. "Forgive me," she whispered in the tongue of Valinor, her words carrying across the corrupted veil like silver bells in darkness, "for what I must do, and for what I must become. Let the price be upon my head alone, and spare those who know not the burden they shall bear." Deep within the dungeons of Dol Guldur, the necromancer felt the touch of ancient power upon the borders of his realm, and his wrath was kindled like a flame in darkness. For 900 years had he labored in secret, gathering his strength and weaving webs of malice across Middle-earth, and none had dared approach his fortress with such bold defiance. "What is this that dares to undo my works?" hissed the voice that was not yet known to be Sauron returned. "What light burns in this accursed wood that my darkness cannot quench?" From the shadows came his servants, fell spirits clothed in terror and despair, wraiths of ancient malice given form through his dark craft. Yet when they drew near to where Eledwin stood at the borders of the corrupted vale, they recoiled as though struck by whips of fire. "Master," they reported, their voices like the whisper of dried leaves, "she bears about her a light that we cannot approach. It is not the light of the Eldar, nor the flame of the Astari, but something older and more fell to us. In her presence, the very bonds that hold us to this realm grow weak." At these words, The necromancer rose from his seat of black stone and iron, and for the first time in many years he knew doubt. Moving to the highest tower of his fortress, he gazed out upon the woman who stood defiant at his very gates, and his burning eye perceived at last what manner of being faced him. "Lamben Golmore," he breathed, and the word fell from his lips like molten metal. "I had thought all such perished in the ruin of the West. Yet here stands one who bears the light of Valinor itself, wrapped in mortal flesh, as a blade is wrapped in its sheath." Long did he study her, seeking to pierce the mystery of her presence, and slowly understanding came to him. "Ah," he whispered, and in his voice was both triumph and fear. "I see the hand of the Valar in this. They send their champion wrapped in seeming mortality, thinking to deceive me as they deceived my master of old. Yet I am not so easily fooled, and this gambit shall serve my purposes as well as theirs." From the tower he called forth his greatest servant, the Witch King of Angmar, first and mightiest of the Nazgul, wrapped in robes of shadow and crowned with a circlet of black steel. "Go," commanded the necromancer, "and speak with this pretender to power. Offer her parley, and learn what game the Valar think to play in these latter days." The lord of the Nazgul bowed low, his very presence like a wound in the air itself. "What shall I offer her, master, if she proves willing to treat?" "What all mortals desire in the end," replied the necromancer with malice aforethought, "the promise of peace and an end to the burden she bears." When the Witch King approached the borders of Dol Guldur, riding upon a fell beast whose very breath was poison, Eledwin showed no sign of fear. Indeed, she stepped forward to meet him as one might approach an old friend, though her hand rested upon the hilt of a sword whose blade gleamed with starlight even in the unnatural dusk that shrouded that accursed place. "Hail, King of the Dead!" she called out in Quenya, her voice carrying clear and sweet through the poisoned air. "What word brings the chief of the Nine to parley with one who walks still beneath the light of the sun?" Sidr, the Nazgul lord, reined in his mount at a distance, for even his deathless form could not easily bear the radiance that surrounded her. "My master would speak with you, daughter of two worlds," he replied, his voice like wind through empty tombs. "He recognizes in you a power that might serve great purposes if you would but listen to reason." "Reason?" Eledwin laughed, and the sound was like silver bells in the distance. "What reason can the Lord of Lies offer to one who has seen the light of Valinor? Yet I will hear his words, for curiosity has ever been both the blessing and the curse of my kind." "Then come," urged the Witch King, "and speak with one whose knowledge spans the ages. He offers alliance, not enmity, for he knows that you too have felt the burden of power that others cannot understand." At these words, Eledwin's expression grew thoughtful. "Alliance? What alliance could exist between the light and the shadow?" Yet she paused, and in her eyes flickered something that might have been hope, or perhaps desperation. "I will come, but not as supplicant or enemy. I come as one who would hear wisdom, if wisdom there be to hear." Together they passed through the gates of Dol Guldur, and Eledwin walked unafraid through corridors where the very stones wept with malice. The servants of the necromancer fled before her passage, and even the walls themselves seemed to recoil from her presence. Yet she pressed on, following the Witch King to the heart of that fell fortress. In the great hall of Dol Guldur, beneath vaults of shadow and despair, the necromancer awaited her coming. He had taken upon himself the form of a tall man robed in darkness, his face hidden beneath a hood that no light could pierce. Yet when he spoke, his voice carried the weight of ages. "Welcome, daughter of the blessed realm," he said, and though his words were courteous, beneath them ran currents of power that made the very air tremble. "Long have I awaited this meeting, though perhaps not in the form I expected, and I have come," replied Eledwin, standing tall and unafraid before the throne of shadow, "though I know not why my feet have carried me to this place of darkness. Speak then, Lord of Moria and Mount Doom, what would you have of one who bears the light you cannot touch?" "Truth," said the necromancer, and the word fell between them like a stone cast into still water. "Truth is what I offer you, Eledwin, who is not what she seems. For I know what you are, and I know the price you pay for the gift that burns within your mortal frame." At these words, Elithwen stiffened, and for the first time since entering that fell place, uncertainty flickered across her features. "Speak plainly, then, if speak you will. What truth do you claim to possess?" "You are Lamben Golmor," said the necromancer, rising from his throne of shadow, "but not as those who came before. You are not elf-born, who learned the tongues of power, nor mortal raised among the firstborn. You are something far stranger and more perilous. You are the voice of Valinor itself, given mortal form and sent into Middle-earth for purposes that even you do not fully comprehend." The woman stood silent, but the light about her seemed to flicker and dim, as though his words had struck her like physical blows. "You heal the corruption I have wrought," continued the Dark Lord, "because you are corruption's antithesis, the very breath of Eru Ilúvatar made manifest in flesh that was never meant to contain such power. Each act of healing tears at your very essence, and each word you speak in the elder tongue draws you closer to the dissolution that awaits all who bear burdens too great for their form to contain." "Why do you tell me this?" whispered Elithwen, and in her voice was pain that had been hidden beneath layers of ancient composure. "Because," said the necromancer, stepping closer though he could not approach within arm's reach of her radiance, "I too bear a burden that was not meant for the form I wear. I too have felt the slow dissolution that comes from holding power beyond my natural scope. We are alike, you and I, weapons forged by the valor for purposes we were not allowed to choose." "We are nothing alike," protested Elithwen, yet her voice lacked the certainty it had held before. "Are we not?" The Dark Lord gestured to the walls around them, where the very stones still writhed away from her presence. "You bring healing, I bring order. You restore what was corrupted, I shape what was chaotic. Yet both of us pay the same price, the slow erosion of our very selves in service to powers that remain comfortable in their distant halls, while we bear the cost of their design." For a long moment, silence stretched between them, broken only by the distant sound of wind through the corrupted towers of Dol Guldur. "What do you propose?" asked Elithwen at last, her voice barely above a whisper. "Unity," replied the necromancer, "not in purpose, for I do not ask you to embrace darkness, but in understanding. You seek passage to the undying lands to escape a burden that grows too heavy to bear. I offer you another path, one that leads to the same end, but by different means. Speak it plainly. Help me to heal Middle-earth in my own fashion," said the Dark Lord, "and I will give you what the valor never offered, the power to lay down your burden by choice, rather than wearing it until it consumes you utterly." In the halls of Rivendell, Elrond Half-Elven felt a disturbance in the harmony of Middle-earth, as though a great harp string had been plucked by an uncertain hand. He rose from his seat in the Chamber of Fire and stepped out upon the terrace that overlooked the valley, gazing eastward toward the darkness that had begun to spread from Mirkwood like ink upon water. "She has spoken with him," he murmured to himself, and his heart was heavy with foreboding. The question now is whether wisdom or desperation shall guide her choice. Meanwhile, in the fortress of Dol Guldur, Elithwen stood before the throne of shadow, and wrestled with thoughts that had plagued her since first she had felt the burden of her true nature settling upon her shoulders. The necromancer waited in patient silence, knowing well the turmoil that raged within her spirit. "You speak of choice," she said at last, "yet what choice have I truly possessed since the moment I drew breath in this world? I was made to serve a purpose I did not select, given power I did not request, and burdened with knowledge that brings only sorrow. If you offer me the ability to choose my own fate, then perhaps there is wisdom in your words." "There is always wisdom in choosing one's own path," replied the Dark Lord, "even if that path leads through darkness. But I ask not that you abandon your nature, only that you consider whether the healing of Middle-earth might take forms other than those the Valar have prescribed." "What forms?" demanded Elithwen, stepping closer despite the aura of menace that surrounded the throne. "Look upon this realm," said the necromancer, gesturing to the walls around them. "You see corruption and evil, for that is what you were taught to perceive. But I see potential, stone that could be shaped into beauty, forests that could be ordered into perfect harmony, peoples who could be guided away from the chaos that consumes them in petty wars and endless strife, through domination and terror, through strength and unity," corrected the Dark Lord. "The free peoples of Middle-earth squabble like children, while greater threats gather in the darkness beyond their sight. They welcome my enemies when those enemies come bearing gifts, and they reject the order I would bring because they prefer the familiar pain of discord to the unfamiliar peace of submission." Eledwen was silent for a time, considering his words. At last she spoke. "And if I were to aid you in this ordering of Middle-earth, what would become of my burden? When the work is complete," promised the necromancer, "when all of Middle-earth rests in ordered peace beneath a single guiding will, then the purpose for which you were made will be fulfilled. The power that tears at your mortal frame will be released, and you may choose whether to pass beyond the circles of the world or to remain and enjoy the peace you helped to create." "You swear this?" "By the music of Ainur itself, I swear it," replied the Dark Lord, and though his words were wrapped in shadow, they carried the weight of binding oath. For 3 days and 3 nights, Eledwen remained in Dol Guldur as guest rather than prisoner, walking the corridors of that fell fortress and pondering the choice that lay before her. The servants of the necromancer gave her wide berth, yet none offered her harm, and she was free to come and go as she pleased within the bounds of the stronghold. On the morning of the 4th day, she sought audience once more with the lord of that realm. "I have decided," she announced, standing before the throne with her chin raised in defiance of her own doubts. "But my aid comes with conditions of my own." "Name your conditions," said the necromancer, leaning forward upon his throne with evident interest. "First," declared Eledwen, her voice ringing clear in the shadowed hall, "no harm shall come to the innocent through any action I take in your service. I will not be made the instrument of slaughter, regardless of the greater purpose it might serve." "Granted," replied the Dark Lord without hesitation. "The innocent have never been my enemies, only those who stand in the way of order." "Second," she continued, "I will retain the right to withdraw my aid if I judge that your methods have become excessive in their cruelty. I serve the healing of Middle-earth, not its devastation." "Also granted," said the necromancer, though his tone suggested careful consideration. "Yet remember that healing sometimes requires the cutting away of diseased flesh." "And third," Eledwen finished, "when our compact is complete and the work is done, you will permit me to pass beyond the circles of the world without interference, should I choose to do so." "This, too, I grant," agreed the Dark Lord, rising from his throne and extending a hand that was wrapped in shadow like a glove. "Will you seal this bargain with the ancient words?" Eledwen hesitated for a moment, staring at the offered hand that seemed to drink light from the very air around it. Then, with a resolution born of desperation and hope in equal measure, she reached out and clasped it with her own. The moment their hands touched, the great hall of Dol Guldur was filled with light. Not the clean radiance that surrounded Eledwen, but a wild, chaotic brilliance that seemed to tear at the very fabric of reality. The walls groaned, and the floor beneath them cracked, while overhead the vaulted ceiling echoed with the sound of thunder that had no source. "It is done!" breathed the necromancer, and in his voice was wonder mixed with triumph. "The compact is sealed, and Middle-earth shall know a healing it has never imagined." Yet even as he spoke, both of them felt the change that had been wrought by their joining of purposes. In Eledwen, the light that had burned so purely now flickered with shadows, while around the Dark Lord there flickered glimpses of radiance that softened his aura of menace. They were no longer wholly what they had been, but something new and strange, a fusion of opposite powers that had never before been attempted in the history of Arda. "What have we become?" whispered Eledwen, staring at her hands, which now seemed to hold starlight wrapped in twilight. "We have become what Middle-earth needs," replied the necromancer, though his voice carried uncertainty despite his confident words. Whether that proves blessing or curse remains to be seen. In that moment, across all of Middle-earth, the wise and the powerful felt the change that had been wrought. In Rivendell, Elrond cried out as though struck by a physical blow and fell to his knees in his garden, while in Lothlorien, Galadriel rose from her mirror with eyes wide with horror and wonder, both. "The music has been changed," she whispered to Celeborn, who came running at her cry. "A new theme has been woven into the song of creation, and I know not whether it heralds salvation or doom." And in the Grey Havens, Círdan the shipwright felt the call of the sea grow suddenly distant, as though the very desire to sail to the undying land had been altered by powers beyond his understanding. In the days that followed the sealing of their compact, strange changes began to manifest across Middle-earth. Where once the corruption of Dol Guldur had spread like a canker through the heart of Mirkwood, now there began to appear clearings of unprecedented beauty, yet beauty touched with an otherworldly quality that made even the woodland elves uneasy. The trees in these clearings grew with mathematical precision, their branches forming patterns of perfect symmetry that spoke of design rather than natural growth. The flowers that bloomed there were fairer than any seen since the elder days, yet they bloomed according to schedules that followed no earthly season, opening and closing their petals in harmonies that seemed to echo music no mortal ear could hear. "It is healing," observed Thranduil, when reports of these changes reached his halls, "yet healing of a sort I do not recognize. The forest grows fair, but it grows strange, as though some alien will shapes its very essence." Meanwhile, within Dol Guldur itself, the fortress began to undergo transformations that puzzled even its master. The black stones of its construction remained as dark as ever, yet now they were shot through with veins of silver that pulsed with soft light. The dungeons, where once prisoners had languished in despair, now echoed with the sound of gentle music, though none could say whence it came. Elithwin found herself changed as well. The burden of power that had once threatened to tear her mortal form asunder now flowed more smoothly through her veins, tempered by the shadows she had embraced. She could heal still, but her healing now carried with it a compulsion toward order that had not been there before. Plants that she touched grew not only green and healthy, but arranged themselves in patterns of perfect beauty that spoke of will imposed upon nature. "Is this what you intended?" she asked the necromancer, as they walked together through gardens that had spontaneously grown within the courtyards of his fortress. "I intended unity," he replied, pausing to study a rose that bloomed with petals of silver and gold. "Whether this is the form that unity should take, I confess, I did not foresee. We have created something new, you and I, perhaps something that was never meant to exist. And if we have erred?" The Dark Lord was quiet for a long moment, gazing out through a window toward the forest beyond. "Then we shall face the consequences together," he said at last. "For good or ill, we are bound now by more than compact. Our very essences have been mingled, and what affects one shall touch the other." It was then that the first refugees began to arrive at the borders of the transformed realm. They came from the settlements along the Anduin and the eastern edges of Rohan, farmers and merchants whose lands had been touched by the expanding influence of Dol Guldur. Yet these refugees came not fleeing terror, but drawn by dreams of impossible beauty and promises of peace that came to them in visions during their sleep. "Something calls to us," they told the elven guards, who questioned them at the borders. "A voice that speaks of safety and plenty, of an end to fear and want. We know not what it is, but we cannot resist its call." When word of this reached the White Council, great was the alarm that arose. Gandalf himself set forth from Rivendell, determined to discover what new sorcery had taken root in the stronghold of their enemy. The meeting of the White Council that convened in the halls of Rivendell was unlike any that had come before. Gandalf had returned from his reconnaissance of Dol Guldur with tidings that filled even the wise with unease, for what he had seen there defied all understanding. The fortress stands transformed, he reported to the assembled council, his voice heavy with the weight of his words. Where once it squatted like a canker upon the face of Middle-earth, now it rises like a jewel set in a crown of living silver. The very air around it hums with power that is neither wholly light nor wholly dark, but something that partakes of both natures. Saruman leaned forward in his seat, his white robes rustling like snow upon stone. And what of its master? Does the necromancer still hold sway within those transformed walls? He does, replied Gandalf grimly, yet he too is changed. I sensed about him a radiance that was not there before, as though the light of Valinor itself had been somehow perverted to his purposes. And beside him stands the woman we sought, Eledwin the Lambengol Moor, yet she too bears shadows that were not her portion before. Elrond stirred uneasily in his chair, his ageless features marked with concern. This speaks of binding deeper than mere alliance. If what you say is true, then they have wrought some change in the very fabric of their being, a melding of opposite natures that violates the fundamental laws of creation. Yet the results cannot be wholly evil, observed Galadriel, her voice carrying the wisdom of ages. My mirror shows me visions of the lands around Dol Guldur, and they bloom with beauty, such as has not been seen since the days before the marring of Arda. If this is corruption, it is corruption that bears fair fruit that draws mortals to it, like moths to flame, countered Gandalf. Already thousands have abandoned their homes to seek the borders of this transformed realm, and their numbers grow daily. What will become of Middle-earth if all its peoples are drawn into the web of this strange power? Pitu. Saruman rose from his seat and began to pace the length of the chamber, his mind working upon the problem with the intensity of a smith working metal. Perhaps, he said slowly, the question is not whether this transformation is good or evil, but whether it serves the greater purpose of opposing the true darkness that we know lies in wait. What mean you by this? Asked Elrond. Consider, said Saruman, turning to face his fellow counselors. We have long known that Sauron lives still, and that he gathers his strength in Mordor for a war that will determine the fate of all Middle-earth. If this union of light and shadow in Dol Guldur can serve as a counterweight to his power, should we not at least consider whether it might serve the greater good? At these words, the council fell into heated debate. Some argued that any alliance with the necromancer was folly beyond measure, while others wondered if perhaps the time had come to consider strategies that would have been unthinkable in earlier days. Throughout their deliberations, none noticed the shadow that had crept across the face of Saruman as he spoke, nor the gleam that had entered his eyes at the mention of power that partook of both light and darkness. The debate continued through the night and into the following day, until at last Elrond called for silence. We cannot decide this matter in haste, he declared. Let us send emissaries to Dol Guldur, not to treat with its lord, but to observe and understand what manner of change has been wrought there. Only then can we judge whether this transformation serves the music of creation or works against it. Yet even as he spoke these words, Elrond's heart was troubled, for he sensed that events had already moved beyond the power of the White Council to control or guide. As autumn deepened into winter, the transformed realm centered upon Dol Guldur continued to expand its influence. What had begun as isolated clearings of strange beauty had grown into vast forests of silver and gold, where every tree stood in perfect harmony with its neighbors, and every stream followed courses of mathematical precision. The mortals who had come seeking this new paradise found themselves welcomed with a generosity that surpassed their wildest dreams. Food appeared upon their tables without labor. Shelters rose around them shaped from living wood that grew according to their desires, and sickness fled from their bodies as though it had never been. Yet with these gifts came changes that few among them noticed until it was too late. Their thoughts, once chaotic and unpredictable as was the way of mortal minds, began to align themselves in patterns of perfect order. They found themselves speaking in unison during their daily prayers, moving through their tasks with choreographed precision, and dreaming identical dreams each night. The children born in this realm emerged from the womb already knowing the songs their parents sang, and their laughter harmonized in chords that no earthly music had ever produced. In the heart of this transformed domain, Eledwin and the necromancer watched the fruits of their union with growing unease. What they had intended as healing had become something far stranger, not the restoration of Middle-earth to its original harmony, but its transformation into something that had never existed before. "They are happy," observed Eledwin, as she watched the inhabitants of their realm go about their perfectly ordered daily routine. "They want for nothing, fear nothing, suffer nothing. Is this not what we sought to achieve? Yet they have ceased to be truly themselves," replied the necromancer, and in his voice was a note of doubt that had not been there before. "They have become notes in a song, rather than singers of their own melodies. Have we healed them, or have we merely replaced one form of suffering with another?" Their debate was interrupted by the arrival of an unexpected visitor, Radagast the Brown, who came riding upon a great eagle whose eyes held wisdom older than the mountain. The wizard alighted within the gardens of Dol Guldur, his earth-stained robes a stark contrast to the perfect beauty that surrounded him. "I bring word from the wild things of Middle-earth," he announced, his voice carrying the urgency of one who has traveled far and fast. "The beasts flee from the borders of your realm, not in fear, but in sorrow, for they can no longer hear the songs their hearts were made to sing. The very stones cry out that the music has been altered in ways that wound the fabric of creation itself." At these words, both Eledwin and the necromancer felt a chill that had nothing to do with the winter wind, for in their hearts they had begun to suspect that their great work might be a form of destruction disguised as healing. "What would you have us do?" asked Eledwin, her voice heavy with the weight of dawning understanding. "Undo what we have wrought, and return these people to lives of suffering and uncertainty?" "I would have you remember," replied Radagast gently, "that the music of creation was made to accommodate discord as well as harmony, sorrow as well as joy. In seeking to eliminate all pain, you have also eliminated the possibility of true growth, true choice, and true love." It was then that the truth struck them both like lightning in a clear sky. They had not healed Middle-earth. They had begun to remake it in an image of perfection that was itself a form of death. The very order they had imposed was slowly strangling the life from everything it touched. "We must find a way to reverse what we have done," whispered Eledwin, and for the first time since their compact was sealed, the shadows in her light began to writhe with anguish rather than power. "But how?" demanded the necromancer. "Our essences are bound together now. To undo the working would require the sundering of bonds that have become part of our very beings." Radagast studied them both with eyes that held the compassion of one who had watched over the growing things of Middle-earth for long ages. "There is a way," he said at last, "but the price will be higher than either of you may be willing to pay." In the deepest vaults of Dol Guldur, where the roots of the mountain met the foundations of the fortress, Radagast led them to a chamber that had existed since the first stones were laid. There, carved into the living rock, were symbols that predated even the Elder Days, marks that spoke of the fundamental forces that had shaped Arda itself. "Here," said the brown wizard, his voice echoing strangely in the confined space, "the music of creation still sounds as it was first written. If you would undo what you have wrought, you must return to the source and remake your choice, but this time understanding the true cost." Seat. The chamber was filled with a power that made both Eledwin and the necromancer gasp with recognition. It was the sound of the Ainu Lindal itself, the great song that had brought all things into being, echoing eternally in this forgotten place. "To sunder your bond," continued Radagast, "you must each sacrifice that which you most value. The light must give up its purity, and the shadow must surrender its desire for dominion. Only then can the natural order be restored." Eledwin stepped forward, her face pale but determined. "I understand. I must give up the very power that defines me, the light of Valinor that burns within my mortal frame. But if I do so, I will become truly mortal. with all the weakness and brevity that entailed. "And I," said the necromancer slowly, "must abandon the dream of ordering Middle-earth according to my will. I must accept chaos and discord as natural parts of the music, even though my very nature rebels against such acceptance." "You understand truly," confirmed Radagast, "but know this, the choice must be made freely, without coercion or regret. The music will accept nothing less than complete willingness." For a long moment, both stood in silence, weighing the price against the need. Around them, they could feel the perfect order they had imposed, beginning to crack and strain as the natural forces of Middle-earth pushed back against their artificial harmony. "If we do this," asked the necromancer, "what will become of us?" "That," replied Radagast gently, "will depend upon what remains when the false portions of your natures are stripped away. You may find that you are less than you were, or you may discover that you are more than you ever imagined." Eledwin looked to her unlikely ally, seeing in his shadowed features the same doubt and determination that warred within her own heart. "Are you willing?" "I am willing," he replied, and in his voice was a note of something that might have been relief. "For I begin to understand that true power lies not in imposing one's will, but in knowing when to refrain from doing so." Together, they stepped into the center of the chamber and began to speak the words that Radagast taught them, words in a tongue older than Quenya, older than the first songs of the Eldar. As they spoke, the air around them began to shimmer and crack, like ice breaking under the pressure of spring floods. The pain that followed was beyond description, not merely physical, but a tearing of the very essence that made them what they were. Eledwin felt the light of Valinor being drawn from her spirit, like water poured from a vessel, while the necromancer experienced the dissolution of the iron will that had sustained him through countless ages. Yet as they endured this agony, something unexpected began to happen. Where their joined essences had been torn apart, new possibilities began to emerge, not the perfect order they had imposed, but something more subtle and more true. They were becoming not less than they had been, but different in ways that neither had anticipated. When the working was complete, and the chamber fell silent once more, two figures stood where the mighty powers had been. Eledwin remained, but she was now truly mortal, her hair silver rather than starlight, her eyes holding the wisdom of one who had touched the divine but chosen to embrace humanity. Beside her stood not the necromancer, but a man whose face bore the nobility of ancient Numenor, his eyes clear of malice for the first time in long ages. "It is done," whispered Radagast, and in his voice was wonder. "The bond is broken, and the music flows once more in its proper channels." Outside the chamber, they could hear the sound of change sweeping across the transformed realm. Not destruction, but a gentle returning to natural rhythm. The perfect trees began to grow with the beautiful irregularity of living things. The artificial streams found courses that followed the contours of the land, and in the settlements, people began to wake from their ordered dreams and remember how to think their own thoughts. "What will you do now?" asked Eledwin of the man who had once been her dark ally. He smiled, and the expression transformed his face entirely. "I think," he said slowly, "that I will learn to be what I was always meant to be, not a lord of shadow, but a guardian of the wild places, a keeper of ancient lore, and perhaps, in time, a friend to those who need guidance, but not domination." And Eledwin, feeling the weight of mortality settling upon her shoulders like a familiar cloak, found that she was not afraid. "Then I will go among the peoples of Middle-earth," she said, "and teach them what I have learned, that true healing comes not from the elimination of all pain, but from the courage to face it and grow stronger thereby." Thus ended the tale of the woman who spoke Elvish, though bards say that she lived many years thereafter among the folk of Gondor and Rohan, and that her wisdom helped to prepare them for the trials that were yet to come. And the man who had been the necromancer of Dol Guldur was seen no more in the councils of the mighty, though sometimes wanderers in the wild places would encounter a gray-cloaked figure who offered counsel without seeking to command, and who spoke of the music of creation with the authority of one who had helped to repair a broken theme. As for Dol Guldur itself, it stood empty for many years, its stones slowly returning to the natural state they had known before Shadow claimed them. And when at last the true Sauron emerged from Mordor to begin his final war against the Free People, he found that the stronghold he had planned to reclaim had become something he could no longer use, a place where the light and shadow had learned to dance together in harmony, rather than struggle for dominance. And that, perhaps, was the greatest victory of all.